The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on Sarah's small homestead. Dust devils danced across the parched earth, mocking her efforts to coax life from the unforgiving land. Her husband, Thomas, had been gone nearly a year, claimed by a fever that swept through the nearby mining town. Now, only the creaking of the windmill and the mournful howl of coyotes broke the silence. Sarah was a woman of quiet strength, hardened by loss and the constant struggle for survival. Each day was a repetitive cycle of tending her small garden, mending fences, and rationing the dwindling supplies. Loneliness was a constant companion, a heavy blanket woven from memories of happier times. She missed Thomas's laughter, his strong arms, the simple comfort of his presence. The rumors of Apache raids had grown louder in recent weeks. Settlers whispered tales of burning homesteads and brutal attacks. Fear not, it's Sarah, but she refused to be driven from the land she and Thomas had worked so hard to build. She kept her rifle close, practiced her aim, and prayed for strength. One evening, as a violent thunderstorm raged outside, Sarah heard a faint scratching at her cabin door. Fear clenched her heart, but curiosity pushed her forward. She cautiously opened the door a crack, peering into the darkness. A figure lay huddled on her porch, soaked and shivering. It was a man, his face painted with tribal markings, an Apache raider, wounded and desperate. Her first instinct was to slam the door shut, to protect herself from the perceived threat. But something in the man's eyes, a flicker of pain and vulnerability, stayed her hand. She knew harboring him was dangerous, a betrayal of her own people. Yet, leaving him to die in the storm felt equally wrong. The decision weighed heavily on Sarah as she stared down at the injured Apache. The storm howled around the cabin, mirroring the turmoil within her. Stories of the recent raid on the Blackwood farm flashed through her mind. The burning buildings, the stolen livestock, the lives lost. It had been brutal, senseless. News of the attack had arrived via a weary rider, his face grim with the details. The Apaches, a band led by a fierce warrior known as Shadow Hawk, had swept through the valley like a destructive wind. They'd targeted isolated homesteads, leaving a trail of fear and devastation in their wake. Sarah had listened in horror, clutching Thomas's old rifle, feeling utterly vulnerable. Now, one of those raiders lay at her doorstep. He was young, perhaps not much older than her own son would have been had he lived. His face, though streaked with war paint and dirt, held a certain nobility. A deep gash marred his shoulder, staining his buckskin shirt crimson. He was clearly in pain, his breathing shallow and ragged. She thought of the other settlers, their fear, their anger, their thirst for revenge. They would want him dead, without question. Turning him away would be the easy choice, the safe choice. But something held her back. Was it pity? A sense of shared humanity? Or something more complicated, something she couldn't quite understand? Sarah knew she couldn't leave him to die. With a sigh of resignation, she reached down and gently pulled him into the cabin, dragging him away from the storm's fury and into the flickering light of her home. The wounded Apache groaned, his eyes fluttering open for a moment before drifting shut once more. Sarah had made her choice, and now she would face the consequences, whatever they might be. The immediate aftermath of her decision was a whirlwind of activity. Sarah, despite her fear, moved with a practiced efficiency honed by years of frontier life. She bolted the door, drew the curtains, and quickly assessed the Apache's wound. It was deep and bleeding freely, but thankfully didn't appear to have hit any vital organs. He was unconscious, allowing her to work without resistance. She ripped strips of clean cloth from an old bedsheet and began to clean the wound with water and a strong-smelling antiseptic she usually used on her livestock. As she worked, she noticed details about him. The intricate beadwork on his moccasins, the finely crafted knife sheathed at his hip, the long, dark hair braided with feathers. This was no mere savage. He was a warrior, a man of skill and pride. The storm outside raged on, a fitting backdrop to the dangerous secret she now harbored. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind, sent shivers down her spine. She imagined the other settlers, huddled in their homes, fearfully discussing the Apache raids. They would be forming posses, hunting down the raiders, seeking retribution. What would they do if they found out she was harboring one of them? She finished cleaning and bandaging the wound, then dragged a heavy quilt from her bed and covered him. He was still pale and clammy, but his breathing seemed a little easier. Exhausted, she sank into a chair, her rifle across her lap, and watched him through the night. Sleep was impossible. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every sound amplified her fear. She knew that by helping this man, she had placed herself in grave danger. But as she looked at his still, young face, she couldn't bring herself to regret her decision. She would face whatever came, armed with her courage and her conviction that even in the midst of violence and hatred, there was always room for compassion. The long night stretched on, filled with apprehension and uncertainty. The morning dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to the turmoil within Sarah's cabin. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and glistening. But inside, the air was thick with tension. The Apache, she now knew his name was Chaska, was awake. He lay still, his dark eyes watching her warily. He didn't speak, didn't move, just observed her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Sarah kept her rifle trained on him, her hand steady despite the tremor in her heart. "Don't try anything," she said, her voice firm. "I won't hesitate to shoot." Chaska understood the threat. His eyes flickered to the rifle, then back to her face. He slowly sat up, wincing in pain as he moved his injured shoulder. He was taller than she had imagined, his frame lean and muscular. He wore only his buckskin trousers and the makeshift bandage she had applied. "Water," he rasped, his voice rough from disuse. Sarah hesitated, then relented. She poured him a cup of water from her dwindling supply and handed it to him. He drank it slowly, never taking his eyes off her. "Why?" he asked, his English halting but understandable. "Why help?" Sarah didn't have an easy answer. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe because you looked like you needed it. Maybe because I couldn't just leave you to die." Chaska studied her face, searching for the truth. He saw no hatred, no fear, only a weary kindness. He lowered his gaze, a flicker of something akin to gratitude in his eyes. "Chaska," he said, pointing to himself. "Sarah," she replied, returning the gesture. It was a small exchange, but it was a start. A fragile bridge built between two worlds, two cultures, two people who should have been enemies. The days that followed would test that bridge, pushing it to its breaking point. The days that followed settled into an uneasy routine. Sarah kept Chaska hidden in the loft above the main room of the cabin. She brought him food, changed his bandages, and kept a watchful eye on his recovery. He was a surprisingly cooperative patient, accepting her care with quiet dignity. The initial tension slowly began to dissipate, replaced by a cautious curiosity. Sarah found herself observing Chaska, trying to understand the man beneath the warrior's paint. He spent his days quietly, whittling wood with his knife, staring out the window at the vast landscape, or simply sleeping. He spoke little, but his eyes were always alert, always watching. Sarah, in turn, found herself talking to him, sharing stories of her life, her hopes, and her dreams. She told him about Thomas, about the hardships of homesteading, about her longing for a family. It was easier to talk to him than it had been to anyone since Thomas died. He listened without judgment, his silence a comforting presence. The threat of discovery hung heavy in the air. Sarah knew she couldn't keep Chaska hidden forever. Travelers occasionally passed by, seeking water or directions. Each time, Sarah's heart would pound in her chest as she fabricated stories and steered them away from the cabin. She knew it was only a matter of time before someone became suspicious. Despite the danger, Sarah felt a growing sense of connection with Chaska. She saw beyond the label of Apache raider and recognized him as a human being with his own pain, his own struggles, and his own code of honor. She knew that what she was doing was dangerous, perhaps even foolish, but she couldn't bring herself to regret it. She was helping a man in need, and in doing so, she was rediscovering her own humanity. The bond between them deepened, forged in secrecy and shared adversity. The days bled into weeks, and the cabin became a schoolhouse of sorts. Sarah, using a worn primer, taught Chaska the basics of English. He was a quick learner, his sharp mind absorbing the new language with surprising ease. He struggled with some of the pronunciations, his tongue unfamiliar with the sounds, but his determination never wavered. In return, Chaska shared glimpses of his Apache culture. He taught Sarah simple words and phrases in his native tongue, words that described the land, the animals, and the spirit world. He showed her how to identify edible plants and how to track animals, skills that had been passed down through generations of his people. He spoke of the Apache's deep connection to the land, their respect for nature, and their fierce defense of their territory. He explained their reasons for raiding, painting a picture of a people struggling to survive against the encroaching settlers, their way of life threatened by the relentless tide of westward expansion. Sarah, in turn, shared her own perspective, describing the hardships faced by the settlers, their dreams of building a new life, and their fear of the unknown. She didn't condone the violence, but she began to understand the complexities of the conflict, the deep-seated mistrust and misunderstanding that fueled the bloodshed. As they learned from each other, a deeper understanding blossomed between them. They saw each other not as enemies, but as individuals caught in the crossfire of a larger conflict. Their shared humanity transcended the cultural divide, forging a bond that was both fragile and powerful. The cabin, once a symbol of isolation and fear, became a sanctuary of understanding and connection. But the outside world, with its prejudices and its thirst for vengeance, still loomed large, threatening to shatter their newfound peace. The idyll couldn't last forever. One sweltering afternoon, as Sarah was tending her garden, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. She squinted, her heart sinking as she recognized the riders approaching her homestead. They were bounty hunters, grim-faced men armed to the teeth, their horses lathered with sweat. They reined in front of her cabin, their eyes sweeping over the property with a predatory intensity. The leader, a burly man with a grizzled beard and a scar that bisected his left eye, dismounted and approached her. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, his voice rough. "We're looking for Apaches. Heard they raided the Blackwood farm. Tracking them east." Sarah's mind raced. Chaska was hidden in the loft, his presence betrayed only by the faint scent of wood smoke and the subtle creak of the floorboards. She had to remain calm, to appear innocent. "I haven't seen any Apaches," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I live here alone." The bounty hunter's eyes narrowed. "Alone, huh? That's not what we heard. Heard you've been getting supplies delivered. Enough for more than one person." Sarah forced a smile. "Just being cautious, mister. Times are hard. A woman can't be too careful." The bounty hunter didn't seem convinced. He gestured to his men, who began to fan out around the cabin, their rifles at the ready. "Mind if we take a look around, ma'am? Just to be sure." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. This was it. She had to protect Chaska, even if it meant putting her own life on the line. "I do mind," she said, her voice hardening. "This is my property. You have no right to search it without a warrant." The standoff had begun. The bounty hunter's scar twisted as he grinned, a chilling expression that sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. "Warrant or no warrant, ma'am, we're going to take a look. You can cooperate, or we can do this the hard way." Sarah knew she was outmatched. She was a lone woman against a group of armed men. But she couldn't back down. She had to protect Chaska, even if it meant risking her life. "I said no," she repeated, her voice trembling slightly but firm. "You'll have to go through me." The bounty hunter chuckled, then nodded to his men. Two of them started towards the cabin, their rifles raised. Sarah raised her own rifle, aiming it directly at the leader. "Stop right there," she warned. "I'm a good shot, and I won't hesitate to use it." A tense standoff ensued, the air thick with anticipation. The bounty hunters hesitated, unsure of what to do. They underestimated Sarah, seeing her as nothing more than a defenseless widow. But they didn't know the strength that lay beneath her quiet exterior, the unwavering determination that had sustained her through years of hardship. Finally, the leader sighed. "All right, ma'am," he said, backing down slightly. "We'll do this your way, but we're going to search the outbuildings. If we find anything, we're coming back for the cabin." Sarah nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew it was only a temporary reprieve. The bounty hunters would search the barn, the shed, every nook and cranny of her property. But it would buy her some time to figure out a way to protect Chaska. As the bounty hunters searched the outbuildings, Sarah slipped into the cabin and quickly warned Chaska. He understood the danger immediately, his eyes hardening with a fierce determination. He was ready to fight, to defend himself and the woman who had saved his life. Sarah knew that their bond had been solidified in that moment, forged in the crucible of shared danger and unwavering loyalty. They were no longer just a settler widow and an Apache raider. They were allies, bound together by a shared secret and a common enemy. The bounty hunters found nothing of consequence in the outbuildings. They rode off, casting suspicious glances back at Sarah's cabin, promising to return. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah knew they hadn't seen the last of them. Chaska, now almost fully recovered, watched them go, his face etched with a grim determination. He understood the danger Sarah had put herself in by harboring him. He knew that his presence was a threat to her safety, a burden she shouldn't have to bear. That night, as the moon cast long shadows across the land, Chaska approached Sarah. "I must leave," he said, his voice low and earnest. "I cannot stay here and put you in danger." Sarah's heart sank. She knew he was right, but the thought of him leaving filled her with a sense of loss she couldn't explain. "Where will you go?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Back to my people," he replied. "I have been away too long. They will be looking for me." Sarah nodded, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. She knew she couldn't ask him to stay, not when his own people needed him. "I understand," she said, her voice choked with emotion. Chaska reached out and gently took her hand, his touch sending a jolt of electricity through her. "You saved my life, Sarah," he said, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I will never forget what you have done for me." He began to gather his few belongings, preparing for his departure. Sarah watched him, her heart aching with a mix of sadness and fear. She knew that once he left, she might never see him again. But as he turned to leave, a blood-curdling war cry echoed through the valley, shattering the silence and signaling a new, even greater danger. It wasn't the bounty hunters who had returned. It was something far more terrifying. The war cry was followed by the thunder of hoofs. Sarah and Chaska rushed to the window, peering out into the darkness. Figures on horseback emerged from the trees, their faces painted for war, their eyes gleaming with a fierce intensity. It was Chaska's tribe, led by his older brother, Kanthi. Kanthi, a towering warrior with a reputation for ruthlessness, had been searching for Chaska since the raid on the Blackwood farm. He had assumed his brother was dead, killed by the settlers. But when he learned that Chaska had been seen near Sarah's homestead, he had come seeking answers and vengeance. The Apache warriors surrounded the cabin, their presence menacing and inescapable. Kanthi dismounted and approached the door, his eyes fixed on Sarah. He spoke in Apache, his voice filled with anger and suspicion. Chaska stepped forward, placing himself between his brother and Sarah. He spoke to Kanthi in their native tongue, explaining how Sarah had saved his life, how she had nursed him back to health. He pleaded with Kanthi to leave her unharmed. Kanthi listened, his expression unreadable. But Sarah could sense the anger simmering beneath the surface. He didn't trust her, didn't understand why his brother would befriend a white woman, an enemy of their people. Finally, Kanthi spoke, his voice cold and hard. He accused Chaska of betraying his tribe, of siding with the enemy. He declared that Sarah was a prisoner, to be taken back to their camp and dealt with according to Apache law. Sarah's heart sank. She knew that Apache law could be harsh, unforgiving. She had heard stories of captives being tortured, enslaved, or even killed. She had to find a way to protect herself, to convince Kanthi that she meant no harm. But as she looked into Kanthi's eyes, she knew that her task would be far more difficult than she could have ever imagined. The situation had just escalated from dangerous to deadly. Chaska argued fiercely with his brother, pleading for Sarah's release. He explained that she was not a prisoner, but a woman who had shown him kindness and compassion. He insisted that she had no knowledge of their raids and posed no threat to their tribe. But Kanthi remained unmoved. He cited an ancient Apache custom, a law that had been passed down through generations. According to this custom, if a warrior was found wounded or helpless within the dwelling of a woman, she was considered to have offered him sanctuary, claiming him as her own. Therefore, Sarah was now considered Chaska's wife and was bound to join his tribe. Sarah was stunned. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had only offered Chaska shelter out of compassion, never imagining that it would lead to this. She protested vehemently, declaring that she was a white woman, a settler, not an Apache. She insisted that she had no desire to join their tribe, to abandon her home and her way of life. But Kanthi was adamant. He declared that the law was the law and that it could not be broken. He ordered his warriors to seize Sarah and prepare her for the journey to their camp. Chaska, torn between his loyalty to his tribe and his feelings for Sarah, was desperate. He argued with Kanthi, threatening to fight him if he harmed Sarah. But Kanthi remained resolute, reminding Chaska that he was bound by the same law, that he had no choice but to accept Sarah as his wife. Sarah, overwhelmed by fear and confusion, looked at Chaska, pleading for help. She saw the pain in his eyes, the conflict raging within him. She knew that he was as much a prisoner of the situation as she was. The ancient Apache custom had trapped them both, forcing them into a situation that neither of them wanted. The journey to the Apache camp was about to begin, a journey into the unknown, a journey that would change their lives forever. Despite her protests, Sarah was bound and placed on horseback, her hands tied tightly in front of her. Chaska, his face a mask of anguish, rode beside her, unable to do anything to alleviate her distress. The Apache warriors, their faces grim and unyielding, formed a tight circle around them, their eyes constantly scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. As they rode away from her homestead, Sarah looked back at her cabin, her heart filled with a profound sense of loss. It was more than just a building. It was a symbol of her life, her dreams, her connection to Thomas. Now, it was fading into the distance, disappearing behind the trees, leaving her adrift in a world she didn't understand. The journey to the Apache camp was long and arduous, taking them deep into the rugged mountains. Sarah, exhausted and terrified, struggled to keep her seat on the horse. She was torn between her fear of the Apache, fueled by years of stories and prejudice, and her growing feelings for Chaska, a man who had shown her kindness and compassion. She argued with Kanthi at every opportunity, pleading for her release, insisting that the Apache custom was unfair and unjust. But Kanthi remained unmoved, his face a stony mask of indifference. He saw her as a possession, a prize to be brought back to his tribe, a symbol of their victory over the white settlers. Chaska, despite his powerlessness, did everything he could to make Sarah's journey more bearable. He shared his meager rations with her, offered her words of comfort, and shielded her from the harsh sun and the biting wind. He knew that she was terrified, but he also knew that she was strong, that she possessed a resilience that would help her survive this ordeal. Finally, after days of relentless travel, they reached the Apache camp, a sprawling village nestled in a secluded valley. As they rode into the camp, Sarah was met with a sea of faces, their expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility. She knew that her life was about to change forever. The question was, would she survive it? Life in the Apache camp was a constant struggle for Sarah. She was an outsider, a white woman in a world that viewed her with suspicion and hostility. The other women, hardened by years of hardship and conflict, regarded her with open disdain. They whispered behind her back, mocked her attempts to learn their customs, and made her feel like an unwelcome intruder. She was given the most menial tasks, forced to haul water, gather firewood, and clean the animal hides, labor that was both physically demanding and emotionally draining. She missed the comforts of her old life, the familiar routines, the simple pleasures of her homestead. Chaska tried his best to protect her, but he was caught between his loyalty to his tribe and his growing feelings for Sarah. He couldn't openly defy his brother, Kanthi, or challenge the traditions of his people. But he made sure that Sarah had enough food, that she was sheltered from the worst of the weather, and that she was not subjected to any physical abuse. He taught her more of the Apache language, helping her to communicate with the other women. He showed her how to perform the daily tasks, explaining the customs and traditions that were so foreign to her. He hoped that by learning their ways, she would be able to earn their respect and acceptance. But it was an uphill battle. The other women resented Sarah's presence, viewing her as a threat to their way of life. They saw her as a symbol of the white settlers who were encroaching on their land, stealing their resources, and destroying their culture. Kanthi, too, remained suspicious of Sarah, convinced that she was a spy, sent by the white settlers to gather information about their tribe. He watched her constantly, his eyes filled with distrust and animosity. Sarah felt isolated and alone, trapped between two worlds, belonging to neither. She longed for her old life, but she also knew that she couldn't go back. She had crossed a line, entered a new world, and there was no turning back. She had to find a way to survive, to adapt, to make a life for herself in this strange and hostile land. Her resilience was about to be tested like never before. Slowly, painstakingly, Sarah began to adapt to life in the Apache camp. She watched the other women closely, learning their skills and customs. She learned how to tan hides, how to weave baskets, how to prepare the traditional Apache foods. She even learned how to ride bareback, her initial fear gradually replaced by a growing sense of confidence. She discovered that the Apache women were incredibly resourceful and resilient, capable of surviving in the harshest conditions. They were skilled hunters, expert trackers, and fierce warriors, defending their families and their way of life with unwavering determination. As she spent more time with the tribe, Sarah began to see the world through their eyes. She witnessed firsthand the hardships and injustices they faced due to the encroaching settlers. She saw their hunting grounds being destroyed, their water sources being polluted, and their sacred sites being desecrated. She learned about the broken treaties, the false promises, and the outright lies that the white settlers had used to steal their land. She heard stories of massacres, of women and children being slaughtered, of villages being burned to the ground. She began to understand why the Apache raided the settlements, why they fought so fiercely to defend their territory. It wasn't just about greed or violence. It was about survival, about protecting their culture, their families, and their way of life. Sarah's perspective began to shift. She realized that the world was not as simple as she had once believed. There were no clear-cut heroes or villains, no easy answers to the complex questions that plagued the American West. Both the settlers and the Apache were victims of circumstance, caught in a cycle of violence and misunderstanding. She began to feel a sense of empathy for the Apache, a growing understanding of their plight. She still held onto her own values and beliefs, but she was no longer willing to blindly accept the prejudices and stereotypes that had shaped her worldview. She was beginning to see the world in a new light, a light that revealed the complexities and the injustices that had been hidden in the shadows. This new understanding would have profound consequences for her future. Despite Sarah's growing understanding of the Apache way of life, Kanthi's distrust of her only deepened. He saw her as a corrupting influence, a symbol of the white settlers who threatened to destroy everything he held dear. He believed that her presence was weakening the tribe, undermining their traditions, and turning Chaska against his own people. He resented the growing bond between Sarah and Chaska, seeing it as a betrayal of their Apache heritage. He believed that Chaska was being bewitched by the white woman, losing his warrior spirit and forgetting his duty to his tribe. Kanthi began to plot against Sarah, seeking ways to discredit her, to isolate her, and ultimately, to drive her away from the camp. He spread rumors about her, whispering that she was a spy, that she was poisoning the minds of the young warriors, that she was bringing bad luck to the tribe. He manipulated the other women, playing on their fears and prejudices, turning them against Sarah. He sabotaged her efforts to learn their skills, making it difficult for her to integrate into the tribe. He even tried to provoke her into anger, hoping that she would lash out and confirm his suspicions that she was a dangerous and uncontrollable woman. Chaska was aware of his brother's machinations, but he was powerless to stop them. He knew that any attempt to defend Sarah would only fuel Kanti's anger and further divide the tribe. He tried to warn Sarah, urging her to be careful, to avoid Kanti's traps. But Sarah refused to be intimidated. She was determined to prove herself, to show Kanti and the rest of the tribe that she was not a threat, that she only wanted to learn and to understand. She continued to work hard, to help the other women, and to show respect for their customs. The tension between Sarah and Kanti grew steadily, threatening to erupt into open conflict. The fate of Sarah, and perhaps the future of the tribe, hung in the balance. Kanti's scheming was about to reach a dangerous climax. The inevitable clash between the Apache and the U.S. cavalry arrived like a storm on the horizon. A patrol of soldiers, sent to scout the area and pacify the natives, stumbled upon an Apache hunting party near the tribe's sacred grounds. A misunderstanding led to gunfire, and several soldiers and Apache warriors were killed. The incident threatened to escalate into a full-blown war. The cavalry, determined to avenge their fallen comrades, prepared to launch a full-scale assault on the Apache camp. The Apache, equally determined to defend their territory and their way of life, prepared to fight to the death. Sarah, horrified by the prospect of bloodshed, saw an opportunity to use her knowledge of both cultures to try and negotiate a peaceful solution. She knew that both sides were driven by fear and misunderstanding, and she believed that with clear communication and a willingness to compromise, a peaceful resolution was possible. She approached Kanti, pleading with him to allow her to speak with the cavalry commander. She argued that a war would only lead to more death and destruction, that it would solve nothing, and that it would ultimately destroy both the Apache and the settlers. Kanti, initially skeptical, eventually agreed to allow Sarah to try. He saw it as a long shot, but he also recognized that they were outnumbered and outgunned. He knew that a war with the cavalry would be devastating for his tribe. Chaska, too, supported Sarah's efforts, believing that she was the only one who could bridge the gap between the two cultures. He promised to protect her, to ensure her safety as she ventured into the enemy camp. Sarah, armed with her courage and her conviction, prepared to meet with the cavalry commander. She knew that she was walking into a dangerous situation, that she was risking her life for the sake of peace. But she also knew that she had to try, that she couldn't stand idly by while two cultures destroyed each other in a senseless war. The fate of the Apache, and perhaps the entire American West, rested on her shoulders. Sarah, escorted by Chaska and a small band of warriors, approached the cavalry encampment under a flag of truce. She spoke eloquently to the commander, a grizzled old officer named Colonel Rourke, explaining the Apache's perspective and pleading for a peaceful resolution. Colonel Rourke, initially skeptical, was eventually swayed by Sarah's sincerity and her knowledge of the Apache culture. He agreed to meet with Kanti to discuss a possible peace treaty, a chance to avoid further bloodshed. But Kanti, despite his initial agreement, harbored a deep-seated distrust of the white settlers. He believed that they could never be trusted, that their promises were always empty, and that their only goal was to steal their land and destroy their way of life. Fueled by his hatred and his desire to protect his tribe, Kanti secretly sabotaged Sarah's efforts. He sent a group of warriors to raid a nearby supply train, hoping to provoke the cavalry into launching a full-scale attack. The raid was successful, and the cavalry, enraged by the Apache's treachery, immediately broke off negotiations and prepared for war. Colonel Rourke, feeling betrayed and humiliated, vowed to crush the Apache once and for all. Sarah, devastated by Kanti's betrayal, confronted him, accusing him of undermining her efforts and dooming his own people. Kanti, unrepentant, defended his actions, insisting that he had only done what was necessary to protect the tribe. A bloody battle erupted between the Apache and the U.S. cavalry, a brutal and senseless conflict that claimed the lives of many on both sides. Chaska, torn between his loyalty to his brother and his love for Sarah, was forced to make a terrible choice. He had to decide whether to stand by his brother, fighting for the traditions of his tribe, or to side with Sarah, fighting for peace and understanding. The decision would change his life forever. As the battle raged around them, Chaska made his decision. He could no longer stand by and watch his brother lead his people to their doom. He knew that Kanthi's hatred and distrust were blinding him, leading him down a path of destruction. With a heavy heart, Chaska turned against his own brother. He fought his way through the chaos, seeking to protect Sarah and to try and stop this senseless violence. He used his knowledge of the terrain and the Apache fighting tactics to help the tribe defend themselves, but he also tried to prevent them from launching any further attacks on the cavalry. He found Sarah pinned down by gunfire and shielded her with his body, risking his own life to protect her. He knew that she was the key to peace, that she was the only one who could bridge the gap between the two cultures. He confronted Kanthi, pleading with him to stop the fighting, to listen to reason. But Kanthi refused to listen. He saw Chaska's actions as a betrayal, a sign that he had been completely bewitched by the white woman. The two brothers engaged in a fierce hand-to-hand combat, their anger and resentment boiling over into a brutal and personal fight. They fought with the ferocity of lions, their bodies bruised and bloodied, their faces contorted with rage. Sarah watched in horror, knowing that the fate of both men, and perhaps the future of the tribe, hung in the balance. She knew that Chaska was fighting not only for her life, but also for the chance to create a better world, a world where peace and understanding could triumph over hatred and violence. The battle between brothers reached its climax, a tragic symbol of the conflict tearing apart the American West. The fight between Chaska and Kanthi reached a brutal conclusion. Chaska, despite his reluctance to harm his own brother, was forced to defend himself. With a final, desperate move, he disarmed Kanthi and held his knife to his throat. He couldn't bring himself to kill his brother, even though he knew that Kanthi would likely continue to plot against him and Sarah. Instead, he lowered his knife, sparing Kanthi's life but effectively ending his reign as leader of the tribe. The battle between the Apache and the U.S. cavalry gradually subsided, both sides exhausted and devastated. The ground was littered with bodies, the air thick with the smell of smoke and blood. The cries of the wounded echoed through the valley, a haunting reminder of the senseless violence that had consumed them. Colonel Rourke, witnessing the carnage, finally realized the futility of the conflict. He ordered his troops to cease fire and offered a truce to the Apache. Both sides, weary of the fighting, accepted the offer. The battle ended, but the scars would remain for years to come. The Apache tribe was shattered, their numbers depleted, their spirit broken. The U.S. cavalry, too, had suffered heavy losses, their confidence shaken, their faith in their mission diminished. Sarah, surveying the devastation, felt a profound sense of grief and despair. She had tried to bring peace, but her efforts had been in vain. She had witnessed the worst of both cultures, the hatred, the violence, the senseless destruction. Chaska, standing beside her, shared her pain. He had lost his brother, his tribe, and his way of life. He knew that things would never be the same again. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Both Sarah and Chaska had been changed forever by the events of the past few weeks. They had seen the darkness that lurked within the human heart, but they had also witnessed the power of compassion, the strength of the human spirit, and the enduring hope for a better world. The ending of the battle was not the end of their story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, a journey into the unknown. In the aftermath of the battle, Sarah and Chaska found themselves at a crossroads. They had proven their love and loyalty to each other, enduring hardship, danger, and cultural conflict. But the question remained, where did they truly belong? Sarah could return to her homestead, to the familiar comforts of her old life. But she knew that she could never forget what she had seen, what she had learned, what she had experienced with the Apache. She could no longer blindly accept the prejudices and stereotypes that had shaped her worldview. She had been forever changed by her time with Chaska and his people. Chaska could remain with his tribe, trying to rebuild what was lost, to heal the wounds of war. But he knew that the old ways were dying, that the settlers would continue to encroach on their land, and that the conflict would continue, perhaps for generations to come. He had seen the darkness in Kanthi's heart, the destructive power of hatred and distrust. He longed for a better world, a world where peace and understanding could triumph over violence and prejudice. They talked for hours, sharing their hopes, their fears, and their dreams. They realized that they could no longer live in either the white world or the Apache world. They had both been touched by something larger, something deeper, something that transcended cultural boundaries. They decided to forge their own path, to create a new life together, a life based on respect, understanding, and love. They would leave behind the hatred and violence of the past and build a future where their children could grow up in peace and harmony. The decision was not easy, but it was the only one that felt right. They knew that their journey was just beginning, and they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, together. Their destination was a place where love and understanding could thrive, a place where two different cultures could finally find common ground. With heavy hearts, Sarah and Chaska bid farewell to their respective worlds. Sarah left behind her homestead, her memories of Thomas, and her connection to the settler community. Chaska said goodbye to his tribe, his family, and his Apache heritage. They traveled for many days, seeking a remote and neutral territory, a place where they could build a new life free from the prejudices and conflicts of the past. They found a secluded valley nestled in the mountains, a place of breathtaking beauty and tranquility. There, they built a small cabin, a symbol of their love and their commitment to each other. They learned to live off the land, hunting and gathering their own food, building their own furniture, and creating their own unique way of life. They shared their stories, their cultures, and their traditions, blending the best of both worlds into a harmonious and enriching existence. They welcomed travelers and outcasts, offering them shelter, food, and companionship. Their valley became a haven for those seeking peace and understanding, a place where different cultures could come together and learn from each other. They proved that it was possible for settlers and Apache to live side by side in harmony, that love and respect could triumph over hatred and violence. Their story became a legend, a testament to the power of compassion, the strength of the human spirit, and the enduring hope for a better world. The ending leaves the audience pondering the complexities of love, loyalty, and cultural divides in the Old West. Did they truly find peace? Did their example inspire others? The answers, perhaps, lie in the heart of each individual, a challenge to embrace understanding and build bridges across divides, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. The sun sets, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a promise of a new dawn, a new beginning.